Hello, thank you guys so much for joining. If I haven't met you already, I am Chef Karla and I have the pleasure of partnering up with Care Team Plus to deliver a monthly nutrition class just for you. This month we are covering the truth about sugar. There's so much to cover here when it comes to sugar, and we all know that sugar isn't great for us, but there is definitely some misconceptions around sugar, the pros, the cons, and how it's kind of hidden in our food industry. So I just want to talk about it and give you some tips to, maybe consume a little bit less sugar, or even just to be more aware of the sugar that you are consuming without even knowing about it. So let's dive in. So I do have a PowerPoint today. It will be linked to this video. So I'll be going back and forth between the slides, and I will do my best to keep you updated as I switch to the next page so that if you do access the PowerPoint, you can follow along. The PowerPoint will be available on the Care Team Plus page. It's www.careteamplus.org under the nutrition tab. And like I said, it will also be linked to this video. Also, if you guys have questions, please drop them in the comments or questions. Drop them in this comment section. I will be able to answer through the comment section, and it's just a great way to continue our conversation and talk together more as a community. And so as you ask questions, it usually encourages somebody else to ask questions and continue the conversation. So please don't be shy. Questions, comments are very welcome. So please participate. Okay, so why should we talk about sugar? Like I said, sugar is hidden in most foods. The average American consumes about 17 teaspoons a day. And sugar, it can contribute to weight gain, fatigue, and cravings. It's one of those things that the more you have it, the more you need it or want it. And so it's hard to kind of pull that away. And so that's how cravings come in. And that's how it becomes so regular in our lifestyle, is because we're used to consuming it. And so we just want more. So it does have long-term health effects, diabetes, heart disease, inflammation. And so all of those things we really want to avoid. So let's talk about how we can do that. So our next slide, what is sugar? So there are multiple different types of sugar. We have natural sugars, which are going to be found in our fruits, which are going to be called fructose. So like just fruits, oranges, strawberries, all of those juices, those all contain fructose, which is a form of sugar. Then we also have dairy products that contain sugar, and they are naturally occurring sugars in dairy. It's called lactose. So you've probably heard of lactose intolerance, and that is the same thing. So lactose is the form of sugar in all dairy. So when you see a gallon of milk and you read the nutrition, you might think, oh my gosh, why are there, I can't recall how many grams of sugar are in a serving of milk, but why are there 8 grams of sugar in a cup of milk? And the reason is that it is just naturally occurring. So what you do want to pay attention to is on your nutrition label, you're going to, and I believe it was like 2019, they updated the nutrition facts label on all of our foods. And now it separates the added sugars and the total sugars. So when you look at the added sugar section of your nutrition label, it will tell you how much the food company has added sugar. If it's something like milk, it's not added sugar because it's naturally occurring. So that might help you navigate a little bit better. And my rule of thumb really is just, if it's naturally occurring sugar, I'm like 2 thumbs up for it. So it's just really good to know. And so here we go. This is our next section on the slide. Is added sugars are things like table sugar, which it's known as sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, which we see so much in our food industry because it is just very affordable. And different forms of syrups are going to be forms of added sugars. And when I say syrups, I'm excluding maple syrup. Maple syrup is another form of a natural sugar. Honey is a natural sugar. Molasses is a natural sugar. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper onto those things. So then there's refined versus unrefined sugar. So there's going to be the whole food sugars, which I'm kind of going back and forth with when I speak about the natural sugars. Those are going to be our whole food sugars. So thinking fruits, milk, honey, molasses, maple syrup, all of those are going to be whole foods. And then processed sugars are things like high fructose corn syrup, granulated sugar, brown sugar. Those are the processed sugars. The recommended daily limit is 25 grams for women, which is about 6 teaspoons, and 36 grams for men, which is about 9 teaspoons. And so if we go back to that last slide we just were on, the recommended limit is, I want to make sure that I say this correctly. It is 17 teaspoons per, I'm sorry, what we're consuming on an average basis is about 17 teaspoons a day. And the limit that they're recommending is no more than 6 teaspoons for women and no more than 9 teaspoons for men. So it kind of puts into perspective how much it really is just incorporated into our food. And so let's talk about kind of how it's in there, what it's doing to us, and how we just navigate and eat less of it. So the impact of sugar on the body, if I asked you, if we just sat down and had this conversation, like, what do you think that sugar does to your body? You probably could list most of these things that I'm going to talk about. I just think it is worth talking about just as kind of a reminder and adds to the weight of the conversation, if you will, but it's also not to scare you into avoiding sugar, because I don't want you to be at the grocery store just hyper fixated on it. It's just a conversation to be more aware of and to make these little changes over time, little by little, for you and your family. So the impacts of sugar on the body, it does spike your blood sugar, which can cause low energy and irritability, which we've all been there. We've all experienced it. That blood sugar spike. So think about when you're very hungry, let's just say, and the term is coined as hangry. When you just get very hungry, you're almost to the point where you're upset, irritable, and you have low energy. So that is a low blood sugar. That's what you're feeling. So then let's say that if you let's get crazy. Let's go on the extreme side of things. Let's just say you have like a bag of candy. You have like Swedish fish. You have a whole bag, whatever, a big portion of Swedish fish. And on a completely empty stomach, when you go from hangry to now you're having candy, what you experience, and if you can recall if this has ever happened, or just a conversation, something to think about, is that you can immediately experience that, like, well, I feel like better. Like, you go from feeling hangry and upset and just irritable and low energy to then like pretty very quickly feeling like almost a different person, right? I don't know if you could feel like your heart rate might increase a little bit, but immediately your mood will come back together. And that's because sugar is a carbohydrate. And if you've joined our classes before, we talk about carbohydrates are the body's preferred source of energy. So when you consume sugar, your body can immediately absorb it, get it into the bloodstream, and get you back on track to feeling well, essentially. And so it gets that blood sugar back up. The thing is that it really spikes that blood sugar, especially if it's something just like candy, like a very processed sugar will spike that blood sugar, which is what results in like feeling good instantly, but then it also drops very quickly as well, which we refer to as a crash. And that is then after that, if you don't consume anything else and you're sitting on this high of the sugar, if you don't consume anything else, then that's where you feel that really low blood sugar, really big crash in your blood sugar, resulting in low energy and irritability. We've all been there, you know? And so when I talk about it, you could probably recall like, oh, that is like definitely how I felt. And so I think it's just powerful to know, to kind of put words and match the science to what you're feeling, like to what your body's actually doing. It helps you just better understand your body. So if it's something that you're kind of in the habit of doing, just the awareness of it is really powerful, and maybe try to do it less and just understand that it's those big spikes and drops in your blood sugar is really difficult on your body. It's very stressful. And so what I would say, if just to kind of go on a little tangent here about blood sugar, if you're in this situation where you are hangry, you're extremely hungry, and you know, you do eat candy, you're like, it's okay to have some candy. Moderation is key, right? What I would recommend to avoid a very aggressive blood sugar spike and a crash is to consume proteins and fat along with that sugar. And so what that does is it gives your body some more nutrients to grab onto. It slows down the digestion of that sugar so that your body doesn't have an extreme spike in that blood sugar. So the fat and the fat and the protein slow down the absorption of that sugar, which will result then in like a more of a level. When your blood sugar comes up, it'll go up slow, it'll kind of stay there for a little bit longer, and then it will drop off slowly as well, which is what we want most of the time. So if you're going to have candy, Do I just tell you to have like scrambled eggs? And that sounds so weird, but you know what I mean when I say that you do just want to balance your meals. If you're having a form of sugar, you know, if you have dessert, have dinner and have dessert like soon after, so that you still have that nutrition in your body so that it's not spiking your blood sugar. So how it impacts the body, back to that, I went on a big tangent about blood sugar. It causes insulin resistance, which is what results in type 2 diabetes. What insulin resistance means is that if you're consuming sugar on a regular basis, an excess amount of sugar on a regular basis, your body's constantly putting out insulin. And so when that happens for an extended period of time, for lack of better terms, your body kind of wears out or becomes desensitized and has a harder time producing that insulin. And so it causes the insulin resistance for your body. So that's what results in type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is something that can be is completely determined by your wellness, by your nutrition and your fitness. So that's really powerful because it's a really difficult situation to deal with. It also causes weight gain. We know that carbohydrates, when we have excess carbohydrates, which is what sugars are, they become stored in our body, and the excess becomes fat. And that's what we're so grateful for our body to be able to store food, and that's how we survive. It's how we're just booming. Humans keep going. It's just a blessing. However, weight gain is such a bummer sometimes, isn't it? Especially when it's off of something that we really enjoy. So it's a good thing that our body stores the carbohydrates, but it's just good to know that our body stores the carbohydrates, and excess carbohydrates will just result in weight gain. It does impact our brain. Excessive amounts of sugar intake, it triggers dopamine, which is what leads to cravings. So when you do consume sugar, we've all felt it. You have sugar and it's like, bing, it lights up your brain. And that is what causes the addiction, and it leads to cravings because your body is constantly wants to trigger that dopamine over and over again. And you will need more and more and more to continue to get the same response. Which that right there, I feel like is really powerful. Sugar is addicting. It's that point blank, that is what it is. So it's just good to know what we're working with and to be clear about that's just how our bodies work. It's a form of survival for our bodies, and the food industry has really capitalized on that. And so it's just good to know, to put the power back into your hands, to know what you're dealing with. Impacts of sugar on the body, another one is inflammation. So it can lead to chronic low-grade inflammation, which is more linked to disease. So that's why we're seeing a lot more disease linked to excessive sugar intake, is because it's just constant inflammation throughout your entire body just causes really negative impact for your body overall. So next slide, where does sugar hide? Like I mentioned, the food industry has really capitalized on the fact that our bodies love sugar and not in a healthy way. So they've put it in a lot of different foods. It, of course, makes things taste really good. And so they've really capitalized. So things that you're going to find sugar in that you wouldn't even assume it to be. I have some pictures here on the PowerPoint so you can get more of a visualization. But sugary drinks, of course, like sodas and juices, energy drinks. So when it comes to juice, juice is sugar. So when you do purchase juice, above the nutrition label, it should read 100% juice. And so that's going to be a better option for your juice. A lot of juice is made from concentrate or has high fructose corn syrup in it, and can just be not great. So if you're consuming juice or giving juice to your kids, I would say the biggest recommendation would be to make sure that it's 100% juice. It will just read right above the nutrition label. And when you're having juice, or your kids are having juice, pair it with a meal. If they're having orange juice, give them breakfast as well, eggs and sausage, which is going to be protein and some fat, or, avocado toast and some eggs, or avocado toast and some sausage. Just making sure that they're getting some protein and fat to make sure that their body can absorb the carbohydrates in a slower rate, to make sure that they're getting the energy that we want them to get from breakfast, but that it's not crashing immediately. Other things you're going to see, of course, just flavored coffees. Coffees have been taking over, as well as energy drinks, and we're seeing so much sugar added to those things. I'm going to talk about sugar substitutes and sugar alcohol, so we'll get there, but I'm talking about like the full on, just fully flavored, not low calorie options here. Those are gonna be very high in sugar. So your Starbucks order, just take a look at it, see what you're working with, because that milk does include sugar as well. So then if you're adding a type of syrup, that's just adding up big time. Of course, other things you're gonna see it in breakfast foods like cereals. Some processed cereals have so much sugar, so make sure that you read the nutrition label. Again, you just wanna check the added sugars and just get a good gauge there and kind of feel out, compare it to other cereals. And I want to say, I don't have a rule of thumb when it comes to cereal and how much, like if like no more than this amount. I would just use your best judgment and kind of, if you're consuming or if you're feeding your kids something that has a higher amount of sugar, just kind of downscale little by little. Flavored yogurts are another thing. You know, yogurt, gosh, the yogurt section these days in the grocery store is huge, and it's because it has this like halo effect that yogurt is so good for us. And yogurt does, yes, it is good for us. It does have its health benefits, but the food industry takes advantage of it and is adding a good bit of sugar to make it taste really great. And again, that's okay, but it's just good for you to know. So when you check out your yogurt section, when you're checking out your yogurt section at the grocery store, read the nutrition label and check out the added sugars. Again, it will have sugar in it because it is lactose, it's dairy product, but just check out the added sugar portion. There's going to be, like if you get the plain, it will have 0 added sugars, and from there, what I like to do is just add my own, like add my own honey. I like to add like a protein powder to my yogurt sometimes, and it, because my protein powder is going to has this sugar in it as well, but it adds a nice sweetness without over sweetening it. So there's just some kind of tips and tricks on that. Granola is another thing that it's really hidden in, so check that out. And then another food item is sauces that we really don't think about. So thinking like ketchup, barbecue sauce, salad dressings, all of those things do have added sugar. So just read the label. Packaged foods like protein bars, you know, those are things, trail mix, those are things that we think are healthier, and they could be, they're healthier snacks, but if they're adding a lot of sugar to it, it might be putting us back at square one. So read the nutrition label, see what you're working with, compare it to what you're currently eating, and then, like I said, just little by little, try to choose less sugar over time. And of course, restaurant meals, they contain a good bit of hidden sugar. The thing about restaurant meals or meals that you're eating out, convenience foods, anything packaged at the grocery store, your body is addicted your body is addicted to sugar, fat, and salt. And so those are the 3 things that make your body, that make food taste good for the most part. Of course, there's other things, but that's just what the food industry knows and what it does. And so it capitalizes on your taste buds, the dopamine response in your brain, and when you allow other people to cook your food to gain something from you, they're going to capitalize on it. It's an unfortunate world that we live in. So that sounds really wah, right? But it does make the food taste good. And they're not terrible people for doing it. I hope not. But it's just good to know that they will just add sugar, fat, and salt where they find that it will just make it taste better. They're not going to say, we don't need this teaspoon of salt because it's not good for the public. They're going to just add a teaspoon of salt. It just is what it is. I hope that wasn't too much of a bummer, but here I have another bummer of a slide, which I'm just going to breeze over because we've really covered a good bit of it. But the next slide is sugar and health risks, which I really went into pretty good depth on the last 2 slides. So of course it does lead to obesity. Unfortunately, it is an increased risk of multiple chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes I mentioned. It can cause heart disease because of the sugar increases triglycerides and bad cholesterol. Liver health it will affect, so the excess sugar can cause fatty liver disease. Dental issues, of course, we're familiar with, so things like cavities and gum disease. And then something that we don't think about often when it comes to sugar and the health risk is that it can affect your mental health. So it's linked to mood swings, anxiety, and depression, and that's going to be linked to the blood sugar spike and crash can really be linked to those mood swings. The anxiety can come from the excess amount of sugar in your body, like I said, it'll kind of increase your heart rate. It can just cause that anxiety. And then that drop of not having any sugar at all can lead to depression. And that roller coaster over time is what will result in more of that mental health, a longer standing issue. Okay, so let's pull ourselves out of that. Really, I feel like that got really negative for a minute. I hate to, when I do these nutrition sessions, I really don't want to talk too much about the negative side effects because I think for the most part we're aware of them. So when it comes to sugar, there's just a lot to talk about, and it's so normalized in our culture to have sugar in so many foods. Just celebrations are very, like, a lot of sugar. It's in a lot of our drinks, and so I find it valuable to talk about. I don't want to cause fear. I don't want to tell you can't have any sugar ever. It's just worth talking about the impact on your health for you and your family over an extended period of time. So I'm sorry that was such a bummer. But let's talk about how we can just take ourselves out of that and not have to worry about any of those long-term negative health risks, right? So our next slide, we're going to talk about tips to reduce our sugar intake. So you guessed it, choose whole foods, right? So like I said, the food industry is taking advantage of our dopamine response in our brain that our body craves sugar the more we have it. So if you take control and you choose more whole foods, the whole foods like whole fruits, vegetables, healthy proteins, grains, all of those things don't have added sugars in it, don't have excess sugars. So your body's not going to it's not going to consume excess sugar. Another thing is going to be cooking more meals at home, which is linked to choosing healthier foods that are whole foods. If you are in the driver's seat and you are preparing your own meals, you'll have better control and knowledge of how much sugar is going into your food. 100% cooking at home, you will have much less sugar in your diet than you would if you go out. I would say most cases. The food industry just add a lot. Read the nutrition labels, which we talked about. So you'll see on the nutrition label under sugar, there's going to be an added sugar amount. And so we just want to keep our eye on that. Another thing is that watch out for some hidden sugars. So things like dextrose and maltose. So that's going to be under the ingredient label, but those will be registered into the added sugar amount. So just reading the added sugar amount on the nutrition label will be very insightful. Like I mentioned earlier, is pairing the carbohydrates like sugar with a protein and a fiber and a fat. And so that's what's going to happen is just to balance your blood sugar. And then another thing, which we talked about so far, is gradually reduce your sugar intake to reset your taste buds. So as I mentioned, your body triggers a dopamine response when it consumes sugar. Over time, that dopamine response is going to require more sugar to be able to get that response. So your body will just crave more sugar. If you slowly back off the amount of sugar that you consume, your body will be able to reset, and it'll reset your palate so that you're not craving as much. It'll reset, just your body will adjust, your brain will adjust, and the dopamine response will still happen with a less amount of sugar, which is what we want, ideally. So like I said, if you're kind of thinking through some things, you're like, oh gosh, like without knowing it, little by little, like our sugar intake in our family has just gone up. That is okay. It's perfectly normal. It's just the world we're living in. And now that you know, you can kind of just little by little take it back down. And that way your body's not going to just have an issue. And then your palate will also adjust, which will be nice. So healthier alternatives. You guessed it. I'm going to recommend fruit. It's nature's candy. It's rich in fiber and antioxidants. It's just going to be a healthier alternative when you're trying to quench that sweet tooth. Another thing is dark chocolate. So anything over 70% is going to have a very robust, that's a word, a robust flavor. So dark chocolate is going to have, it's hefty, but it is very satisfying, and it might kind of satisfy that craving. Another option is natural sweeteners in moderation. So like honey, maple syrup, dates, dried fruit. Those things are going to be a great alternative because they usually have a small amount more of micronutrients. So granulated sugar or high fructose corn syrup has nothing good for it in you, nothing good for you in it. But natural sweeteners like honey, for example, has a small amount of micronutrients in it. So it does give you a little bit more bang for your buck, if you will. And the glycemic index is a little bit lower. So it spikes your blood sugar a little bit less than like a granulated sugar because it's not refined. And then another thing that I really like to do is experiment with spices. So spices like cinnamon or nutmeg or an extract like vanilla extract will actually add sweetness without adding sugar. So like when you make oatmeal, for example, adding some cinnamon to that will add like a little sweetness. A smoothie, sometimes I like to add like a vanilla extract if I want like the sensation of sweetness. I also like to add cinnamon to my coffee. It just gives the sensation of sweetness without having to add added sugar. So just kind of play around with that, keep that in mind. But things like cinnamon and nutmeg, cloves, vanilla extract, even like a coconut extract. Obviously, we're going crazy when we talk about coconut extract, but different things like that, you can get creative and they'll add the sensation of sweetness without having to add sugar. Okay, our next slide, sugar substitutes. So this, we're talking about monk fruit and stevia. I have on my PowerPoint, I have a picture of what monk fruit, like what it looks like in its raw form and what stevia looks like in its raw form. If you've seen these items on nutrition labels or on the ingredient label, I just wanted to kind of cover it a tiny bit. So both of these items, I would say, are healthier alternatives to sugar. You'll see these often in things like protein powders or protein bars, or anything that's kind of trying to be a healthier food item. And for the most part, I would say these are pretty good swaps for sugar. So monk fruit to start. It's a sweetener that's extracted from the monk fruit. And it's this small little round, you'll see the picture, it's this small little round fruit and it's native to China. The sweetness is 150 to 250 times sweeter than sugar. So if you're normally adding like a teaspoon of sugar to your coffee and you're like, I'm going to switch and I'm going to do monk fruit, you would need to do like 1/4 of a teaspoon of monk fruit to get, and you'll yield that same sweetness, which is bananas. It's usually sold as a powder or a liquid, and it's often blended with other ingredients like erythritol to balance the taste in the bulk, which we're going to talk about erythritol in another few slides. The taste does have a slight aftertaste, which is the downside, and especially in higher concentrations, you'll taste it. Like when it comes to like a protein powder, I believe my protein powder that I consume is sweetened with monk fruit, and it has no aftertaste to it, or at least not that I noticed, because it's like a chocolatey protein that kind of like offsets that aftertaste. So if it is a higher concentrate of the monk fruit sweetening it, you will have an aftertaste. Like when I add monk fruit to my coffee, I definitely can taste the difference. So when it comes to processing, some commercial monk fruit sweeteners are mixed with fillers like dextrose or erythritol. So dextrose is just another sugar. And so you'll see that they're just like, I'll see it sometimes like in little packets that you'll see like on a coffee station. The same with stevia, that they'll have like the first ingredient on this little packet. It'll say a stevia packet or a monk fruit packet. And so you're like, oh, sweet. Like this is a sweet. This is a good alternative where I'm not consuming sugar. But the first ingredient on the little packet is dextrose, which is sugar. And then they're adding monk fruit. So it's less volume of sugar, but it's still sugar. And it's just like, it's just good to know. Okay. And then cooking and baking, it's not a direct swap when it comes to, a baking. If you're making cookies and you think, okay, I'll add no regular sugar, I'll add all monk fruit, it doesn't really work that way. It works well in beverages, but in some baking, but it doesn't produce the bulk or the caramelization that sugar does. So if you're messing around and you want to bake, it's an experiment. And usually when I do that, I usually say the recipe calls for a cup of sugar. I would say like, do 3/4 of a cup of sugar and 1/4 a cup of monk fruit, or even actually probably less monk fruit since it's so much sweeter. But just little by little, you can kind of chip away and play with the recipe because it will have a different result. Stevia is very similar to monk fruit in that it is a natural 0-calorie sweetener. It's extracted from the leaves of the stevia plant. However, it's 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar. So again, it's not a 1-to-1 situation. So if you do swap and use stevia, for example, in your coffee, you would definitely downsize the amount of stevia that you would need. It could have a slight bitter flavor, sometimes like a licorice-like aftertaste. And And similar to monk fruit, the processing, it can become highly refined. And so it kind of might take away from like that natural pull. Something that we like about the stevia is like, oh, it's natural, but it can become very highly processed. So again, something to just read the ingredient label and kind of know what you're consuming. When it comes to gut health and stevia, it's generally well tolerated, but if you have a higher intake, it can affect the gut bacteria. And then when it comes to cooking and baking, stevia it doesn't provide the bulk or the caramelization that sugar does. And it usually needs to be combined with another sugar when baking. So just as the monk fruit, it's not something that you can just swap 100%, but you can still, add regular sugar and maybe add less regular sugar and add a little bit more stevia or monk fruit to kind of get that perfect taste. Okay, our next slide, we're going to talk about sugar alcohol. So we have sugar substitutes like monk fruit and stevia. Those are more natural sugar substitutes. And then we have sugar alcohols. So these are going to be things like xylitol, erythritol, sorbitol. Our next slide, or maybe a few slides to come, then we're going to talk about sugar substitutes, which are going to be things like stevia. So they're like, it's wild really like to break it down how many different things we're working with when it comes to sugar. So this conversation is worth having to better understand like that sugar substitutes, sugar alcohols, and sugar other sugar substitutes like stevia, they're not all the same. So it's just good to have the conversation. So xylitol is 100% sweet as sugar. So it's like that 1-to-1 ratio that if you do swap it, you can add equal parts sugar. You can add the same amount of sugar as you do xylitol, and the sweetness will be the same. You'll see it usually in like sugar-free gum or mints or candy, and it does have a little bit of an aftertaste, but xylitol is something that I would say is like a pretty easy swap. Erythritol, again, is another sugar alcohol. It's 70% as sweet as sugar, so you'll need a little bit more erythritol than you would regular sugar. You'll see it usually in beverages, baked goods, things like chocolate. There's different chocolate companies that make no sugar or low sugar options, and you'll see erythritol used there. Another one is sorbitol. It's 60% as sweet as sugar. It's found in sugar-free candies, chewing gum, and some diet foods. It might have a laxative effect if it's consumed in a higher amount, so just something to be aware of. When it comes to sugar alcohols, like pros and cons, let's have it, right? So the pros, of course, it's lower calorie. There's minimal blood sugar impact because it's not absorbed in your body. So the sugar is absorbed in your gut, which then sends into your bloodstream and which causes that high spike. When it comes to a sugar alcohol, all of it is not absorbed in the gut, which is like why it's lower in calories for us, because we don't absorb it. However, if we consume too much of it, the con is that it can cause bloating, gas, and diarrhea, and excessive consumption can lead to a laxative effect. I feel like I just did a commercial for a prescription drug. Just when you talk about the cons, you're like, oh, is that really worthwhile? But it's an excessive amount that usually causes those cons. So the pros, I feel like, outweigh the cons, but of course it's not like, if you're trying to downsize your amount of sugar, I wouldn't 100% swap sugar alcohols for your sugar consumption. I would recommend consuming less sugar overall and just adding a little bit of sugar alcohols to kind of bridge that gap for you. So don't just like get rid of sugar and completely add all sugar alcohols. You're going to have some very negative side effects. Very uncomfortable. Our next slide, I talk a little bit more about sugar alcohols, breaking it down. I've covered most of this. I'm going to keep going. I'm just reading through, making sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, perfect. Okay, our next slide is artificial sweeteners. So artificial sweeteners are things like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin. So on this slide, I have pictures of, so if you pull up the PowerPoint, I really like to provide you guys with pictures so that you can see, like if there's your brands that you are regularly consuming, it kind of like hits you. So I do have like a Red Bull on here, Diet Coke, Crystal Light, Fiber One cereal, a sugar-free gum, Activia, yogurt. So those are going to be foods that contain artificial sweeteners. So aspartame aspartame is the artificial sweetener that's used in Equal or NutraSweet. And so that's going to be 200 times sweeter than sugar. Saccharin, you're going to find in sweet and low, which is 300 to 400 times sweeter than sugar. That's wild. And then sucralose is Splenda, which is 600 times sweeter than sugar. Wild. On the next slide, I'm breaking down the artificial sweeteners, the pros and the cons. So let's dive into that. So the pros of artificial sweeteners, let's talk about the good. They help reduce the overall caloric intake, which can support weight management. Love that. So you're getting that sweet taste without a lot of calories. Blood sugar control, it doesn't raise blood sugar or the glucose. It doesn't have the effect on the insulin as sugar does. Dental health, it doesn't promote cavities or tooth decay like sugar does. Another pro would be that it's highly sweet and small amounts are needed. It's also heat stable, these artificial sweeteners. So some of them can be used in baking and cooking without losing the sweetness. Again, it's an experiment for sure on how to swap it, but it's a good option there. The cons when it comes to artificial sweeteners is that some of them have aftertastes that are kind of bitter or metallic, which kind of might affect your taste preference. The impact on appetite and cravings. So this is the big thing when it comes to artificial sweeteners. So I usually recommend avoiding artificial sweeteners as much as possible, which is a big bummer. I know, like especially if you're thinking like, oh gosh, I have Crystal Light every day. What am I gonna do? Here's why. When it comes to artificial sweeteners, it can impact your appetite and your cravings. So some studies suggest that it has this kind of same dopamine response in your brain. It kind of like resets your palate because of the sweetness, so that your body wants more sweetness. So when we're downsizing the amount of sugar we're consuming, we want to get ourselves out of that need for sugar, those cravings for sugar. And when you're consuming artificial sweeteners, it seems like because of the amount of sweetness, it's keeping you in that loop of craving more sugar. So your appetite, your cravings for sugar will not go away when you're swapping for artificial sweeteners, because your palate is still experiencing it. And research has only really shown this with artificial sweeteners. So when we're talking about stevia or monk fruit, the sugar alcohols like erythritol, those aren't having the same impact. So it's just super interesting to think about. Another thing when it comes to artificial sweeteners is your gut health. They can kind of damage your gut bacteria, especially if you're consuming them in a higher amount. Artificial sweeteners, of course, they're not whole foods, so they don't provide nutrients or fiber or any other health benefit like something like fruit does or honey or maple syrup. And then the long-term effects of artificial sweeteners, they're generally recognized as safe, but the long-term metabolic and gut health effects are still being studied. So as I mentioned, the gut health, how it affects your appetite and your cravings, that's kind of what we're referring to when I talk about metabolic impact. It's just something that I would, if you were to start, and we're talking about this sugar conversation, if you're trying to reduce your amount of sugar intake, I would not recommend adding in more artificial sweeteners. I would recommend adding in more sugar alcohols or natural sweeteners and just downsizing your amount of sugar intake. Okay, so when it comes to getting our overall intake of sugar lowered, what are we doing? Let's talk about some mindful eating habits. So big thing is practicing portion control. So like I said, sugar is in a lot of the food industry and a lot of convenience foods. It's a lot of foods at restaurants. And so the big thing is just practicing portion control. So just trying to be more mindful when you're eating. If you're constantly finding yourself eating in front of a screen, or you're like you scarf down a meal in between, like on your lunch break, try to get back to work, or, you know, we have kids and you're trying to feed the entire family and everybody needs you and you're just trying to scarf things down. That's tough because there's only so much you can do in that situation, but try to be more mindful when you're eating so that you're not just over consuming your food. So when I say that, just slowing down, savor each bite, goes a long way. So when you can, obviously like every meal might not be perfect, but just something to be aware of, like taking a deep breath in between, setting your fork down in between each bite. I know I have a 2-year-old at home, and so sometimes when I eat meals with him, it's just kind of crazy. As much fun as they are, it can be kind of crazy. So when I make these recommendations, I know from my own experience that it is way easier for me to tell you to do it than to actually do it. So I'm with you. And then be mindful of emotional eating and triggers. So sugar is one thing that we eat when we're happy and we eat when we're sad or stressed, right? Because of that dopamine response. And so like, oh, I just got, it's my birthday, let's have some cake, yay. Or like, I had a rough day, I'm gonna have some ice cream. So like no matter what, we kind of turn to sugar. And so it's just good to know. It's just good to be mindful of that. It's good to know what's triggering that craving for sugar. I think just knowing that goes a long way. Just kind of responding to it instead of just like automatically autopilot grabbing the ice cream, being aware of like, oh gosh, I did really have a hard day. Maybe instead of turning immediately to ice cream, like I'll go for a 10-minute walk first and then maybe have like a little bit of ice cream, but something that if you can swap a healthier habit instead of turning immediately to having something high in sugar, just that will be healthy for your body over time, and it'll kind of pull you away from that craving and that trigger for sugar. And then just focus on progress here. It's not about perfection. Like I've said, I've tried to make sure I've hit this home that we do consume a good bit of sugar in our daily diets, and this conversation is really just bringing it to your attention. You don't have to go through and clean out your entire pantries. It's just about making little changes over time that will get you in the direction that we want to go. So practical strategies to curb some cravings. Stay hydrated. Thirst is often mimics sugar craving. So again, in this busy lifestyle, you're just go, 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 go. And we kind of forget to hydrate. So just making sure that you're keeping yourself hydrated will hopefully pull you away from having a really strong craving at the end of a busy day. Of course, prioritize protein at each meal. We've talked about this in previous nutrition sessions, but protein is going to be really great because it's keeping your body full. When you become really tired or hungry, your body's like craves carbohydrates, which is going to be sugar, because your body prefers that for a fast source of energy. So your body's just doing you a favor, it thinks, and says like, give me anything, give me sugar, because it's so hungry. So if you keep yourself like well fed, you're avoiding any big drops in blood sugar, making sure you're consuming a healthy amount of protein throughout the day, it will just avoid that craving. It'll just keep you like more of a level mindset. Managing your stress will reduce emotional eating. So like, again, we live in a really busy world. It's just a demanding world. So, do what you can to manage your stress, and however you know yourself best. But be mindful about managing your stress. So things like yoga or meditation. I really like to walk to manage my stress. That's one thing. If I can take my dog for a walk, I just really enjoy that time. Or this sounds silly, but like even taking my son for a bike ride, it's something that like I can kind of just like whoof. So maybe meditation's not for you. Find like what it is for you that will help manage your stress. So like reading a book, just like having a minute to yourself, whatever it is, but just trying to find something that manages stress for you. That will help reduce emotional eating. It will help keep you in control when you do have a craving. It'll help keep you a little, again, more level-headed. Getting enough sleep is a big one to curb your cravings for sugar. So poor sleep will increase your sugar cravings. And again, that's because your body thinks it's doing yourself a favor. It's thinking like, okay, we had a terrible night's sleep last night. We need energy. We're going to crave sugar because that's where we get our energy. However, if you have a terrible night of sleep, having a balanced meal with a protein, a carbohydrate, and a fat is going to do yourself way more favors than like turning to a donut. Much easier said than done. Yes, I get that. So, but it's just good to know to like fight against that craving as much as possible, and it will turn your day around if you have balanced meals throughout the day to get you through a sleep-deprived day. Bless you. If you have a sleep-deprived day, it's the worst. Anyway, keeping healthier snacks available is going to be great. So again, if we're avoiding being extremely hungry, and you're having like balanced meals throughout the day, have a snack throughout the day, it will keep you from that extreme hunger, which is going to when you get into that extreme hunger, your body's going to crave sugar because it wants that quick spike in blood sugar to get you back on track. So if you keep a healthier snack like yogurt, nuts, fruit, peanut butter and a banana, like quick things like meat sticks, those are gonna be really great healthy snacks that will keep your blood sugar level and will keep you from dropping out and getting super hungry. Okay, our takeaway message. So much has been said. Sugar is okay in moderation, but hidden sugars, they do add up. And so we covered a lot of different ways that you'll find hidden sugars and how we can avoid those hidden sugars. And like I said, knowledge is power, so now that you know, it kind of puts you back in the driver's seat and you're not just relying on the food industry without knowing what's happening. So just read your labels and just make mindful swaps. Just little by little, decrease the amount of sugar that you and your family are consuming. And you can enjoy sweetness without sacrificing your health. So having a little bit of sugar here and there is a-okay. And swapping for a natural sugar is going to be your best bet. So fruits, whole fat dairy is great. Maple syrup, honey, dried fruit, those things in moderation are fantastic. So food for thought. Here we go. This is my last slide for you guys. I just want to kind of encourage some conversation or encourage some thought for you guys as we round this conversation out. If you after we've had this conversation, can you think of hidden sugars in your daily meals that you're like, now that you mention it, I get, like, my family loves this Greek yogurt, but it's strawberry Greek yogurt. And just like, just check the food label. And like, you might see that like, oh, that yogurt actually has a lot of sugar in it. So just, kind of reflect on our conversation and think about what you and your family are consuming that maybe there's some hidden sugars that we haven't had the chance to think about. And then, okay, next question. How do you handle sugar cravings in stressful or emotional times? I don't know, like, this is something that I can totally relate to, that sugar cravings happen like when I'm really stressed or emotional. And so how do we handle that? Is, like, if you can reflect on that and think like, oh gosh, I totally fall into that trap. Knowing that, like I said, is helpful. And so if you can just kind of stay ahead of it and you know that this might be coming, or like, okay, I know I have a really busy, stressful upcoming week. Like, I'm not going to buy ice cream at the grocery store. I'm not going to buy like my sugar craving. I'm not going to have it at the house. I'm going to manage my stress in this way instead. So like I said, whether it be like reading a book or going for a short walk, maybe just like sitting outside for a little bit, the weather's getting so nice. So find something else to hopefully help you manage that stress. What swaps or alternatives could you realistically incorporate into your routine? This is something to really think about. Like I said, so if you think like you have that strawberry yogurt in your refrigerator and you're like, ooh, what am I going to do? Something you could do is, like I said, just buy whole Greek yogurt and you could add a little bit of honey. Another thing that I like to do is just buy whole fat Greek yogurt and like frozen strawberries, and then just puree the frozen strawberries and add it to the Greek yogurt. And so that way you're getting less, you're still getting some sugar from the sweetness of the strawberries, but you're not adding, high fructose corn syrup or unnecessary amount of sugar. So that might be a really good way to bridge the gap. And then you're getting more micronutrients and vitamins, minerals from the strawberries added into the yogurt. So that might be a good idea. Then another thing to kind of reflect on is, how has your energy or your mood been affected by sugar intake? So like I mentioned throughout the PowerPoint, that these spikes and drops, they put you into these hefty mood swings. And so, and then sometimes there's like regret after having a higher amount of sugar, if it was like after like a stressful time. So that can just put you in a really big mood swing, and that's just a bummer. So knowing that your food intake is actually affecting your mood, it's just something we're talking about and we're thinking about. And then last question for you to reflect on is, what challenges do you face in reducing sugar? Like, how could you overcome them? So a challenge might be like, nobody else in my family finds this important. That's tough. Like, that really is tough. And so how can we overcome that? And so doing something like small changes, especially in a scenario like that, is going to be your best bet. And maybe if nobody else is on board and you're finding a lot of resistance, maybe if you could just make that change for yourself, and if your family can just see you making these changes, which it will be far harder to take this road alone, but if you can lead your family in that, and maybe they're seeing your changes, they're seeing your these small daily habits that are just slightly different, they might slowly merge into that. Especially if you have kids, your kids they're just so fantastic at mirroring things, and what you do is so powerful. So if your family's not on board, if you make these changes, your family might eventually get on board, maybe. But I do understand that it is just a challenge. Like our food, it is such a huge part of our life, and because our lives are so busy, we do rely heavily on convenience foods. So like I said, small changes will add up over time. And just this conversation isn't meant to scare you, but it is just something worth talking about, and just it's kind of like a little reset. It's something that we kind of know, but I think it's worth discussing because it reminds you, like, okay, yeah, this is something I might be able to focus on. And especially as we head into the holidays like Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas, we're just going to be swamped with sugar. It's going to be everywhere. So it's worth having the conversation now to kind of try to stay ahead of it. You guys, thank you so much for joining and watching. Please leave comments, questions, anything underneath of this video. Like I said, this PowerPoint will be linked to this video. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends and family. And I will see you guys next month.